At my sister's wedding in Boston, I had paid $30,000 in deposits with my name on every contract, from catering to florals to the band. And when her groom looked me in the eye and told me I did not belong, I stepped into the hallway and used the power he never saw in minutes. I canceled every service I had paid for, and inside the music died. The waiters cleared untouched plates, the cake disappeared, and phones came up by sunset. The clips were everywhere, and my family called me a monster. My name is Emily Carter. I am 29, and I manage events in New York, which means I know exactly how a room runs and exactly how it stops. Stay with me, and I will show you how a public humiliation became a line of law in ink, a career breakthrough, and the night their perfect story collapsed. The summer air in Boston clung to my skin as I stepped out of the cab in front of the Beacon Hill Hotel. I tilted my head up at the sandstone facade, polished brass doors, gleaming guests in tailored suits and silk dresses streaming inside. My palms were damp against the clutch I carried, and I took a steady breath before moving forward. My navy dress felt simple compared to the glitter I saw on everyone else, but I had chosen it with care. Not too plain, not too loud. Just enough to say, I had a place here. Inside the lobby hummed with conversation and the sweet scent of lilies and roses. A string quartet played a soft waltz. I caught sight of my sister Sophia at the far end of the ballroom, framed by an arch of white roses. Her gown shimmered under the chandeliers, her veil catching the light like spun glass. She looked radiant, and for a fleeting second, a warmth welled up in me. I thought she might look my way, smile the way she did when we were little, and shared secrets after bedtime. But her eyes slid away, and the warmth in my chest turned cold. Ryan saw me before anyone else did. His posture stiffened, his expression sharpened, and he walked with deliberate steps across the marble floor until he blocked my path. His voice rang out louder than the music. "You don't belong here. This is not your place." The bow of the violin screeched against a string, the music breaking. Heads turned as whispers surged around me. I froze, heat climbing from my collarbone to my face. My throat tightened as if the entire room had shrunk to nothing but his words. I looked past him toward Sophia, praying she would speak. But her head bent lower, bouquet trembling in her hands. My father adjusted his tie and fixed his eyes on a spot above my shoulder. My mother smoothed her dress and stared at the floor. Not one of them met my gaze. Ryan stayed planted in front of me, arms crossed, his smirk curling into triumph. "You heard me, Emily. You should leave." Every insult I had swallowed over the years pressed down on me in that moment. Every holiday where Sophia was celebrated while I was treated like an afterthought. Every dinner where I was compared and always fell short. My chest ached with humiliation, but under it, a different fire rose. I forced myself to lift my chin. My voice was low but steady. "All right. If I don't belong here, then neither does this perfect day you built." The smirk faltered on his lips, confusion flashing across his eyes, but I didn't stay to savor it. My parents remained stone still. Sophia's cheeks flushed pink, but she kept her eyes on her bouquet. I turned and walked away, the click of my heels echoing in the silence before the quartet scrambled to pick up the melody again. I felt the whispers following me, sharp and cutting, but I didn't bow my head. I kept it high, every step a choice. The hallway outside was cooler, the air less stifling. I leaned against the wall, drew a long breath, and let the sting of humiliation run its course. My hands trembled not from fear, but from the urge to act. I had told myself for years that one day I would stop carrying their rejection like it was my inheritance. That day had arrived. I opened my clutch and pulled out my phone. My thumb scrolled to the folder labeled Wedding Vendors. My heart steadied, my breath slowed. I pressed the first number. The line clicked, and a woman's voice answered. "Thank you for calling Avalon Catering. How can I help you?" My grip tightened around the phone. "Yes," I said evenly. "This is Emily Carter, the name on today's contract. I need to cancel the service immediately." There was a pause, then the voice cautious. "Are you sure you want to cancel today's service?" I looked back at the ballroom doors, hearing faint laughter and music bleeding through. My lips curled into the smallest of smiles, Absolutely. The woman on the line hesitated, then confirmed my request. She told me the staff would begin packing up immediately, and I thanked her with a calm that surprised even me. As I ended the call, a strange stillness spread through my chest, like I had finally exhaled after years of holding my breath. I scrolled quickly through the folder on my phone. The florist, the bakery, the rental company, the band manager. One by one I dialed. My voice stayed steady each time. "This is Emily Carter. The name on the contract is mine. Cancel the service effective right now." The responses varied. Some polite, some confused, some reluctantly formal. But all agreed. Once the contract holder says the word, the service stops. By the time I lowered the phone for the last call, my pulse was racing, but not with fear. I slid the phone back into my clutch and straightened my shoulders. My reflection stared back at me in a gilded mirror hanging in the hallway, eyes brighter than they had been a moment ago. I looked almost like a stranger to myself, someone who had finally decided she was done taking what was handed to her. The muffled music inside swelled for a few minutes longer, then faltered. A ripple of confusion crossed the room as I stepped quietly through the side entrance and leaned against the doorway. The violinist lowered his bow, speaking urgently to the band manager. One by one, the musicians began unplugging cables and closing their cases. The quartet's final notes died abruptly in the air. Guests glanced around, murmuring. Across the ballroom, waiters emerged from the kitchen carrying trays back instead of forward. Platters of hors d'oeuvres were whisked away, untouched champagne flutes removed from the tables. I saw one of the catering supervisors whisper something to a younger waiter who looked startled, then began clearing the plates in front of stunned guests. The whispers swelled. Some guests laughed nervously, others frowned, clutching their handbags. I could see Sophia's face from across the room, her lips trembling as her eyes darted from the emptying tables to the band packing their instruments. Ryan's expression darkened instantly. He stormed toward the band, snapping his fingers and demanding to know what was going on. The lead violinist, calm but firm, held up the signed contract in his hand. I could not hear his words, but I could imagine. "The contract holder canceled. We are done here." Ryan's voice rose sharp and angry enough that the closest guests shifted away uncomfortably. My father tried to intervene, pulling him aside, while my mother fluttered nervously at Sophia's elbow. But there was nothing they could do. The bakery staff wheeled the towering wedding cake through the side door, its frosted tiers disappearing into the hallway. The florist's team began dismantling the rose arch. Guests gasped as the beautiful centerpiece wilted before their eyes. Stems snapped, petals falling to the floor as they were shoved back into boxes. Sophia's hands trembled so hard the bouquet slipped from her grasp and hit the floor. She bent to pick it up, but halfway down her knees buckled, and she simply crumpled into the nearest chair. I watched her shoulders shake as tears welled in her eyes. For the first time all day, she looked small and fragile, stripped of the perfection she had always worn like armor. Ryan rushed to her, crouching down and whispering furiously, but she pushed him away with a sob that carried through the hall. The sound silenced the chatter for a beat. All eyes turned to them, the bride and groom unraveling in real time. The whispers returned louder now, tinged with something sharper. Disbelief, judgment, the first spark of gossip that would not stay in that room. I caught the sight of someone lifting their phone, angling it just so. Then another. Guests capturing every second. I moved along the edge of the wall, close enough to feel the heat of the chaos, but far enough to remain unnoticed. A guest brushed past me, muttering under his breath that this was a disgrace. Another shook her head, telling her husband she had never seen anything like it. Ryan straightened his face, flushed his hair sticking slightly to his forehead. He shouted at the catering supervisor, who simply nodded toward the signed paperwork in his hand and walked away. Ryan kicked at one of the chairs, his voice cracking as he cursed under his breath. My parents stood stiff, their eyes darting between the guests and the crumbling decor. My father's lips were pressed thin, my mother's hand trembling at her side. Neither dared meet my eyes. I let the moment sink into me, every flicker of shame they felt, every ripple of humiliation spreading through the hall. For once, it was not me absorbing it. It was theirs to carry. A waiter hurried past with a half-empty tray, muttering apologies to guests who had not even tasted their meals. The scent of food vanished as the kitchen shut down, pots clanging faintly in the back as the staff packed up. The ballroom, once glowing with music and light, sagged into silence. The chandeliers still shone, but the energy had drained out, replaced with a heaviness that even the most determined smiles could not hide. People began drifting toward the exits, murmuring excuses, avoiding eye contact. Sophia lifted her head, mascara streaking her cheeks, eyes red. She stared across the room as if searching for me, but when our eyes met, she flinched and looked away. I pushed off the wall and stepped back into the hallway, the faint echo of Ryan's angry voice chasing me. I felt a strange calm wrap around me, stronger than any I had ever known. The foundation of their perfect day had collapsed, and I had been the one to pull it apart with nothing more than a few phone calls and the power of my own name. As I walked down the corridor, the muffled chaos fading behind me, I pulled out my phone again. I had a feeling the night was far from over. The phone felt heavy in my hand as I slipped it back into my clutch, the sound of voices still echoing faintly behind the ballroom doors. My heels clicked against the empty corridor, and with every step, the weight of the past pressed harder against my chest. Faces, words, and memories rose uninvited, the kind that never leave no matter how many years pass. I was 10 years old again, sitting at the worn oak kitchen table in our house in Cambridge. My mother slid a glossy envelope toward me, the letterhead of a summer arts program shining at the top. "Congratulations, Emily," she said softly. "You were accepted with a full scholarship." My heart had pounded with joy, because it was mine, something earned with the drawings I stayed up late, perfecting under the dim desk lamp. But before I could say a word, my father cleared his throat. "Sophia should go instead." The words fell like a stone in the middle of the table. I stared at him, waiting for a smile that told me he was joking. It never came. "She has the personality for these things," he added, looking at Sophia with pride. "You will get another chance." Sophia's eyes lit up, her fingers brushing over the envelope as if it had always been hers. I wanted to scream, but my mother's warning glance silenced me. I sat there while my father praised her, while she thanked him with a hug, while the scholarship I had worked for disappeared into her hands. I can still hear the scrape of the chair as I left the table, the sound of my footsteps pounding up the stairs, the muffled sobs I pressed into my pillow so no one would hear. That night I told myself it was only one time, that they would see me next time. But it was never just one time. Years later, another dinner table, another moment seared into me. I was 17 grades perfect, acceptance letters piling up, and I dared to hope my father would look at me the way he looked at Sophia. He lifted his glass that night, smiling across at my sister, who had barely passed her exams. "Sophia is our pride," he declared, the sparkle in his eyes meant only for her. "Emily, you are responsible, but Sophia, she is the joy of this family." I remember gripping my fork so hard, my hand ached, swallowing down the lump in my throat until it felt like I might choke. My mother nodded along, beaming at Sophia as though nothing I had ever done mattered. I excused myself early that night, my appetite gone, retreating to my room to study under the glow of the desk lamp again, alone with the hollow echo of his words. Even now, walking the hallway of the Beacon Hill Hotel, those moments returned like ghosts. The echo of, "You don't belong here," carried the same sting as those dinners, as those scholarships taken, as those praises I never received. My father's voice overlapped with Ryan's in my head, one blending into the other, both cutting from the same blade. I paused by a tall window, looking out at the city lights flickering against the summer night. The streets below bustled with cars and laughter from passing pedestrians, a world that had no idea what had just unraveled inside. My reflection stared back at me, eyes rimmed red, but behind them a spark that refused to die. I thought of the sketchbooks stacked in my childhood closet, pages filled with drawings no one cared to look at. I thought of the jobs I worked through high school, babysitting, scrubbing tables, stocking shelves, while Sophia flitted from cheer practice to dance camp, paid for with my parents' money. Every sacrifice, every dismissal carved me into the woman standing here now. The weight of humiliation tonight was familiar, but so was the strength that came after. I pressed my hand against the cool glass of the window and closed my eyes for a moment. Let them stare. Let them whisper. I had carried their indifference for too long, and now the burden was theirs. The sound of hurried footsteps broke my thoughts. A hotel staff member rushed past, arms loaded with boxes of flowers that had once framed the altar. He avoided my gaze, muttering apologies under his breath as petals trailed behind him on the carpet. I stepped aside, watching the evidence of the unraveling pile up around me. In that moment, I felt the threads of past and present twist together, binding the years of being silenced to the decision I had made tonight. The girl who lost her scholarship at 10 and her father's praise at 17 had finally stood up, and she was not about to sit down again. I drew another breath, steadied myself, and turned from the window. The night was only beginning, and I knew this was far from finished. I walked down the corridor toward the back exit, the carpet soft under my heels, my clutch heavy in my hand. My mind flicked back to the night a year earlier, when I first saw the truth about Ryan. I had been leaving a late meeting in Cambridge, cutting through a side street toward the T station, when I spotted him outside a bar. He was leaning against the wall with two men in dark suits, his voice sharp, his gestures agitated. I slowed my steps, hidden in the shadows, and heard enough to know he was lying about more than a drink tab. He was talking about a loan overdue payments, and how Sophia must never find out. The memory made my jaw tighten even now. I had told Sophia the next morning, pulling her aside at her apartment near Kenmore Square, my voice trembling as I explained what I had overheard. She had smiled tightly, eyes flashing with irritation. "Ryan told me about that," she said. "It was just business, you must have misunderstood." She waved me off like a child making up stories. From then on, I saw the way Ryan looked at me, as if I were a threat that needed to be eliminated. Tonight, in front of 100 guests, he finally took his chance. I stepped out into the courtyard, where the night air smelled faintly of exhaust and roses. My phone buzzed in my clutch. When I checked the screen, lit with notifications one after another, faster than I could read. At first, I thought they were messages from friends asking about the wedding, but when I opened one, I saw a video already circulating. It showed me standing frozen in the ballroom while Ryan's voice thundered, "You don't belong here." The camera shook as guests gasped. Another clip followed the band, leaving the cake rolled out Sophia in tears. My heart dropped and surged at the same time. The videos were already on TikTok, tagged with words like wedding disaster and Boston meltdown. I scrolled through comments as numbers climbed in real time. "This is insane. This. Who cancels a whole wedding? Feel sorry for the bride. That groom is trash." I blinked at the speed, thousands of views turning into tens of thousands before my eyes. By the time I reached the corner of Charles Street, my phone was buzzing non-stop. I stepped into the glow of a street lamp and saw my cousin Mark's name flash across the screen. I answered hesitantly. His voice was sharp. "Emily, what the hell did you do? Everyone is saying you ruined Sophia's wedding." I closed my eyes, the exhaustion pressing down. "I did not ruin anything, Mark. I canceled what I paid for. Ryan told me I didn't belong, so I gave him exactly what he asked for." Silence hung between us, until he muttered that the family would never forgive me, and hung up. More calls followed, each angrier than the last. My Aunt Patricia scolded me for humiliating Sophia. An old neighbor left a voicemail saying she had never expected such cruelty from me. I listened until I couldn't anymore, and shoved the phone back into my bag. I kept walking, the city noise wrapping around me, a strange mix of shame and defiance beating in my chest. The world was seeing me as the villain, but a quieter truth whispered under the chaos. Ryan's mask had cracked, and Sophia's fairy tale had crumbled, not because of me, but because they built it on lies and silence. I ducked into a late-night diner, the kind with red vinyl booths and the smell of coffee soaked into the air. I slid into a corner seat and ordered tea, just to have something warm between my hands. My phone sat face down on the table, buzzing every few minutes with more notifications. I stared out the window at the dark streets and let my mind wander. I imagined Sophia at that moment, her gown crumpled, her makeup streaked guests, slipping out the door, while Ryan fumed beside her. The same girl who once took my scholarship with a smile was now watching her perfect day fall apart. The tea arrived steaming in its chipped mug. I sipped slowly, my reflection rippling in the surface, and thought again of Ryan's voice outside that bar. If Sophia had listened, then maybe tonight would have been different. But she had chosen him, and in choosing him, she had chosen to believe I was the enemy. The bell over the diner door jingled, and two college kids slid into a booth laughing as one of them pulled up TikTok on his phone. Their voices carried excited mocking. "Did you see this Boston wedding? It has like 500,000 views already." I turned slightly, my stomach flipping. On the small screen, I caught a glimpse of myself frozen under the lights of the ballroom, Ryan's voice cutting me down. They laughed harder, oblivious to me sitting only a few feet away. I wrapped my hands tighter around the mug, heat seeping into my palms, and forced myself to breathe. The whole city would know my name soon. Maybe the whole country. I set the mug down, pushed a few dollars onto the counter, and left without another word. Outside, the night was louder, sirens wailing in the distance, traffic lights blinking against the dark sky. I pulled my coat tighter around me, the buzz of my phone like a heartbeat I couldn't escape. Somewhere deep inside, a voice steadier than all the chaos whispered that this storm might destroy me or it might set me free. Either way, it had only just begun. The next morning I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating against the nightstand. My head was heavy, my eyes sore from too little sleep. When I reached for it, the screen glowed with a string of missed calls and one message from my father. He had never been one for long texts. This one was short and sharp. "The family is considering legal action. You embarrassed us. You will pay for this." For a moment I just sat there, the words burning into me. A lawsuit. The thought should have terrified me, but instead, a dull anger spread through my chest. They had never once defended me, not as a child, not as an adult. Now they wanted to punish me for standing up to them. I pushed myself out of bed, pulled a sweater over my head, and made coffee while the city outside buzzed awake. By mid-morning, I called Hannah Price. She picked up on the first ring. Hannah had been my closest friend since college, now working as a civil attorney at a firm in Lower Manhattan. I told her everything in a rush: the wedding, the humiliation, the cancellations, the threats from my family. She listened quietly until I stopped. "Bring the contracts," she said finally. "I want to see everything in writing." An hour later, I sat in her office, the walls lined with law books, sunlight streaming in through the tall windows overlooking Broadway. I slid a folder across her desk, contracts neatly clipped inside. She adjusted her glasses and began reading, her pen tapping against the paper. "You signed every one of these," she said. "You made the payments. The right to cancel is written here in plain language. They can complain, they can scream, but legally, you were within your rights." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Are you sure, Hannah? My father said they could sue." "Anyone can threaten to sue," she said, leaning back in her chair. "But if they do, they will lose. What you did was contractual. You didn't steal, you didn't defraud. You exercised the authority you had as the client." Relief washed through me so strong my eyes stung. For days, maybe years, I had lived under the belief that every move I made would be judged by them, defined by them. Now here was someone telling me I had been right to claim my own power. Hannah studied me carefully. "Emily, you need to stop letting them convince you that standing up for yourself is wrong. They used you to pay for their dream, and when you pushed back, they called it betrayal. That is not how family should work." I nodded, swallowing hard. She reached across the desk and squeezed my hand, once firm and steady. When I left her office, the streets of Manhattan felt different under my feet. I walked past the newsstand and saw a headline on a local paper: "Viral Wedding Disaster Shocks Boston." My stomach clenched, but I forced myself to buy a copy. Flipping it open, I saw a grainy photo of Sophia with mascara-streaked cheeks, Ryan yelling at staff in the background. My name was there too, painted as the sister who canceled everything. I folded the paper and slipped it into my bag. Let them write. Let them spin the story. I knew the truth, and more importantly, I had proof of it in signed contracts sitting in Hannah's office. That night my phone buzzed again. This time it was Sophia. Her voice cracked the moment I answered. "How could you do this to me?" she cried. I was humiliated in front of everyone I know. I closed my eyes and gripped the phone tighter. "I warned you about Ryan," I said softly. "You chose not to listen. And when he told me I didn't belong, you stayed silent." She said nothing for a long time, only the sound of her breathing. Finally she whispered, "Everyone hates you, Emily." And she hung up. The words stung, but the echo of Hannah's calm certainty steadied me. They could hate me, the internet could mock me, but I knew I had acted within my rights. I set the phone down and stood by the window of my apartment, the city lights flickering across the glass. For the first time in years, the fear of my family's power over me felt smaller. Still present, but shrinking. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. Down on the street, a crowd laughed outside a bar, the ordinary rhythm of life carrying on. I touched the cool glass and thought of all the times I had been told to sit down, to keep quiet, to smile, while my sister was praised. Not anymore. I turned from the window, sat at my desk, and opened my laptop. The viral videos were everywhere now, climbing into the millions. Clips of Ryan shouting Sophia, crying guests scattering. My name trending alongside words like ruthless and cold. I scrolled until my vision blurred, then shut the laptop with a snap. The storm was far from passing. Tomorrow at work, I would face the curious stares, maybe even the whispers. But somewhere beneath the dread, a new possibility flickered. What if the same world that judged me also began to see me differently? What if this chaos could become the start of something I had never been given before? The office lobby smelled like fresh coffee and printer ink, and the guard waved me through with a look that lingered a second too long. By the time the elevator doors opened on our floor at Empire Events Group, I could feel eyes following me from cubicle to cubicle. A pair of coordinators at the bullpen went quiet as I passed. Someone pretended to scroll while sneaking a glance at me. I set my bag down at my desk, turned on the monitor, and tried to pretend the building was not humming with my name. My inbox had exploded. Client updates, vendor confirmations from last week, calendar reminders, and tucked between them a dozen emails with subject lines I did not want to open. I clicked through the real work, first approving a seating chart for a biotech conference, confirming a lighting plot for a museum gala, sending a quick thank you to a venue manager who had squeezed us into a prime Saturday in September. The rhythm steadied me. Line items, deliverables, timelines. This was a language I could control. A message popped up from David Miller, asking me to step into his office when I had a moment. My stomach flipped, then settled. I smoothed my hair, grabbed a notebook, and walked the narrow hallway past the framed photos of our biggest events. The door to his office was open. He stood by the window skyline, slicing the morning light into clean angles across the carpet. He said he appreciated me coming in, and motioned to the chair. I sat and folded my hands, feeling the weight of what he would say before he said it. He told me he saw the videos and that the company had already fielded a couple of press calls, asking if we had a comment on an employee involved in a viral wedding. He let that hang, then added that they did not plan to comment and that HR had it covered. I watched his face for judgment and found none. Instead, he looked at me as if measuring something steadier than gossip. He said he wanted to talk about what happened not for gossip, but because what he saw in those clips was someone who stayed composed while the room spun out of control. He said there is a difference between cruelty and boundaries, and that from where he sat, I had drawn a line and owned the consequences like a professional. The breath I had been holding eased out of me. I told him I had signed the contracts and that I had consulted a lawyer. I said I understood the optics, but I did what was within my rights. He nodded once and said he believed me. Then he slid a folder across the desk and rested his palm on top of it. He said there was an opportunity he had been weighing for a week. Our firm had just won a competitive bid to produce the Midtown Cultural Arts Benefit at the Metropolitan Ballroom, a legacy event with a major sponsor and a donor list full of names that make headlines. The budget was big and the margin for error small. The event needed a lead producer who could manage vendors' calm, difficult personalities and make ruthless decisions without losing composure. He lifted his hand and the folder opened like a door. Inside were timelines, a preliminary run of show notes from the sponsor, and a number on a budget page that made my heart knock twice. He told me he wanted me to take the lead. He said I would report directly to Melissa Grant, our senior vice president of events, and that he would clear resources to build a small team around me. He asked if I was up for it. For a moment, I could only stare at the paper. The night before, the city had watched me become a villain and a punchline. Now here was my boss offering me a project that could define a career. I felt something shift inside me, a careful pride uncoiling. I said I was ready. The words came out steady and final. He smiled in that small way he reserved for good calls and said good, then outlined the next steps. A kickoff by end of week, an internal stakeholder meeting with design and operations, a call with the sponsor on Friday morning. He said he would put a hold on a quiet conference room I could use as a war room, and he would loop in finance to expedite vendor deposits once we finalized selections. He asked me to send a first pass at the vendor shortlist by tomorrow afternoon. We covered logistics because logistics are how you keep from drowning. He told me HR had drafted a short note for staff reminding everyone about professional conduct on social media and that I should forward any harassing messages that made it to my work email. He said the company would back me if anything crossed a line. I thanked him, and for once I meant it without reservation. Back at my desk, I let the folder rest beside my keyboard and pulled a fresh legal pad into the center of the blotter. I wrote a title for the project in thick block letters, then started mapping the spine of the event. Venue holds and walkthrough, lighting and audio, floral and decor, stage programming, run of show, VIP arrival flow, security, transportation, catering. I wrote until the whiteness of the page filled, and with it the noise in my head dulled to a workable hum. I sent 3 emails in quick succession, one to Melissa proposing a vendor shortlist and a draft agenda for the kickoff, one to our finance controller mapping out the deposit schedule, one to reception requesting the conference room downstairs through the end of the month. As each email flew out, I felt the scaffolding of a new reality take shape. A shadow fell across my desk, and I looked up to see Jenna from design peering down at the folder. She said she heard about the benefit, and that it was a big one. She added that most people in the building were talking about everything else, but the ones who had been here long enough knew the only thing that mattered was whether you could deliver. I thanked her quietly. She grinned and said she liked working with people who had a spine and told me to send her color palettes by end of day. At lunch, I took a quick walk around the block, the concrete heat rising through my shoes. I passed a newsstand with a tabloid stacked in a slanted pile. My sister's face was on the cover again. I kept walking. A man on a bench scrolled his phone and laughed at something I did not want to see. I kept walking. Back at my desk, I drafted the vendor shortlist with a focus I had not felt in weeks. For lighting, I chose a company that could paint the ballroom without drowning it. For audio, a firm that understood speeches that run late and performers who improvise. For florals, a designer who could translate opulence into restraint. I built backups for each, then backups for the backups. I wrote notes for the sponsor call to keep the conversation moving toward decisions, not preferences. At 3, the reception desk called up to say a courier had arrived with proofs for a set of gala invitations. When the messenger reached my desk, he paused and blurted that he had seen me on the internet. He realized what he had said and flushed. I took the envelope, thanked him, and watched him hurry away. It was odd being a person and a headline at the same time. I laid the proofs on the desk and forced my mind back to cardstock weights and serif fonts. By late afternoon, the war room was ready. I walked into the small glassed space on the 12th floor and found a whiteboard, a table, a few chairs, and a view that cut across midtown rooftops. I pinned the timeline to the wall with push pins and wrote dates across the board in neat columns. I printed the preliminary run of show and taped it beside the door so anyone who entered would know where the heartbeat lived. As I stood there, a calm certainty settled under my ribs. The humiliation did not vanish, but it lost its authority. I had taken the chaos and turned it into a list of decisions that I would make with clear eyes. I felt my phone vibrate and glanced down. A new message from an unsaved number appeared, and I knew before opening it that it was family. The text said there would be dinner at the house on Sunday. Father requested that I attend. It added that Ryan and Sophia would be there. There was no please, no question, just the old command phrased like an invitation. I stared at the screen until my reflection ghosted across the glass. The war room hummed with quiet fluorescent light. On the wall, the dates and tasks waited for me to choose what mattered. I slid the phone back into my pocket and listened to my own pulse return to a steady pace, already deciding how I would walk into that dinner and what I would no longer allow. Sunday came with a gray sky and a wind that made the trees along my parents' street lean like they were listening. I parked 2 houses down and sat for a moment with the engine off, breathing in the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. My phone stayed in my bag. No checks for messages, no last-minute pleas. I had already decided who I would be when I crossed that threshold. The front door opened before I reached it. My mother stood there with a careful smile that did not touch her eyes. My father appeared behind her posture, straight hands in his pockets, like a judge removing his robe. I stepped into the foyer, and the familiar scent of lemon polish and old rug dye wrapped around me. I could hear voices from the dining room clink of glass against glass, the low hum of polite conversation that was never truly polite. We did not hug. My mother gestured toward the dining room and said they were waiting. I followed the hall past the framed family photos where Sophia's milestones marched in order, and mine dotted the edges. In the dining room, the table gleamed under the chandelier. Sophia sat at one end in a pale sweater, eyes shadowed, hands folded too tightly in her lap. Ryan was beside her, jaw set, that curated charm carved into something harder. A place had been laid for me across from them, as if symmetry could create peace. We began with silence. Then my father cleared his throat and said this had been a difficult week, and that there was a way forward if I was willing to be reasonable. My mother added that families mend when people take responsibility. Her gaze landed on me like a pin. I kept my voice even and said I would not apologize for using authority that was mine. I said I had reviewed every contract with counsel, and what I did was lawful and final. Sophia's eyes flickered toward Ryan. He stared at the table. My father said lawful did not mean moral. He said I had humiliated my sister and the family. I felt the old reflex rise in me to defend and smooth, then let it pass like a wave. I said I would not carry blame for Ryan's words, or for anyone's silence after them. I said the only humiliation was what happened in that ballroom when I was told I did not belong, and no one objected. The room tightened. My mother reached for the serving spoon as if food could anchor us. She asked if we could begin. Roast chicken, potatoes, green beans lined like soldiers. We ate without appetite. Forks touched plates. The chandelier hummed. Ryan finally spoke. His voice tried for casual and missed. He said the cancellations had caused irreparable damage and that vendors were threatening claims. I kept my eyes on him and asked which vendors had claims if all invoices were paid. His jaw flexed. He said the problem was not invoices, the problem was timing, and that my actions had sabotaged relationships he needed professionally. Sophia looked at him, then a small turn of her head, interest cutting through the fog. I said again that I had paid for services and chosen to stop them, and that any professional relationship he damaged by screaming at staff was on him. He laughed without humor and told me I did not understand how these things worked. He said deposits hold favors and favors matter. He said he had promised deliverables he could not meet now, and people were expecting to be made whole. Sophia's fingers tightened until her knuckles blanched. She asked quietly what he meant by promised. Ryan said commitments, the kind everyone makes, the kind that keep business moving. My father nodded, as if this was wisdom. I did not look away. I asked Ryan if the commitments included the short-term loan I had overheard him negotiating last year behind the bar on Pearl Street. The words stepped into the room and stood there. Sophia's eyes snapped to mine. My mother froze with the serving spoon mid-air. Ryan's neck flushed. He told me not to invent stories to justify cruelty. I stayed with the memory and recited details I did not want to remember. dark suits, overdue payments, a warning that Sophia must never find out, the alley light buzzing above them, the way his hand moved when he was lying. He slammed his palm against the table, and the water glasses trembled. He said I had no right to spy on him. My father barked his name, a warning he should have given in a ballroom days ago. Ryan tried to pull the mask back on and failed. He said he had had cash flow issues, everyone does, and that everything would have been fine if I had not ruined the day. Sophia asked what cash flow meant. The word sounded fragile in her mouth, as if she already knew. He shrugged it off and said temporary pressure, nothing affecting her. I asked him if the vendors had been promised payments from the event service floats. He told me to mind my own business. I said that when my money underwrote those floats, it became my business. My mother set the spoon down with a click and told both of us to stop. She said this was not the time to dredge up nonsense. I turned to Sophia and said calmly that I was not dredging anything. I said I had warned her once because I loved her, and that I was saying this now because love does not mean silence when danger sits at your table. Ryan's chair scraped. He stood, shoved his hands into his pockets, paced to the window and back. He said this entire conversation was ridiculous, and that no one here understood the pressure he was under. He said he had a bridge loan that would be covered once a client closed. He said he had used a few deposits as interim coverage like any smart operator would. The confession slipped out fast, wrapped in contempt, and then he realized he had said too much. His mouth snapped shut. Silence sank into the room. Sophia stared at him as if trying to bring the pieces into focus. She asked if their joint funds had been touched. He did not answer. She asked again in a smaller voice. He said their accounts were fine, and that he had managed everything. I saw her remember the day her card had been declined at a boutique months ago, and how she brushed it off as a glitch. I saw the lines of their life redrawn in her face. My father began to talk about perspective and how men in business take calculated risks. My mother nodded quickly, eager to smooth. I pushed my chair back and stood. I said I would not stay for speeches that rewrite what we all heard. I said the only apology I would ever offer Sophia would be for not being louder sooner. Sophia looked at me like she wanted to speak and could not form the words. Ryan moved toward me as if to block my exit. He told me I had destroyed the wedding and that now I wanted to destroy his marriage. I kept my hands at my sides and said I had not destroyed anything. I had stopped paying for a fantasy and it collapsed under its own weight. He stepped closer, the air around him sour with anger and something like fear. My father ordered him to sit. He did not. I looked to Sophia and spoke only to her. I said she had a right to every statement, every email, every contract, every account that touched their event and their life. I said if she wanted copies, I would send them. I said I would not speak to her through anyone else again. She nodded once, a small, decisive movement I had not seen since we were girls, and shared a room with a tape line down the middle. I picked up my coat. My mother said, "Please stay and eat, we can be civil." I told her civility without truth was just furniture. My father said if I walked out now, I would be closing the door on family. I told him I was opening a door to self-respect, and that it would stay open to anyone who chose honesty. I reached the foyer and felt the tug of a lifetime at my back, the urge to turn around and make it easy for everyone but me. I kept walking. At the door I heard Sophia say, "Ryan, sit down and answer me." The old house held its breath. Outside, the air felt colder and cleaner. I stood on the step and let my pulse settle. My phone vibrated in my bag. For a second, I imagined the screen lighting with the family thread and a fresh list of accusations. When I pulled it out, it was a number I did not recognize. A text waited with a short line that made the night tilt. It said, "I have questions, and I want the truth," and the name beneath it was Sophia. Sophia texted again before I left the driveway, a second line that said, "Can we meet tomorrow morning?" I replied yes, and suggested a coffee shop near the public garden where the windows faced the lagoon. She agreed and added thank you, then nothing else. I sat in the quiet of my car and let the relief wash over me. She wanted the truth. That was a start. The next day the cafe was half full, all soft clatter and low conversation. I chose a corner table with 2 chairs and laid a folder on the wood, crisp edges aligned. Sophia arrived a few minutes later, pale, tired hair pulled back like she had not bothered with mirrors. She did not hug me. She sat, folded her hands, and stared at the folder as if it might burn. She asked what I had, and I opened it. Copies of vendor contracts, screenshots of emails, the timeline of payments from my accounts. I spoke without flourish. I said the contracts named me as the client and gave me the right to terminate. I said I had paid deposits and balances and that the service providers had ceased service when I requested, as the contracts allowed. I slid each document toward her one by one, and she read, lips moving soundlessly. When she finished the last page, she leaned back, eyes glossy, and asked if Ryan had known that I was the one paying in full. I said yes. I saw something shift in her like a wall, losing its last hidden supports. She whispered that he had told her everything was covered by his connections. Then she told me about the boutique card decline last spring and the restaurant check that bounced in June. She had believed his stories about bank errors and processing delays. She touched the printouts with her fingertips like they were proof she could finally trust what she felt. Her phone buzzed on the table and she glanced at it, then showed me the screen. It was a text from a man whose name I did not know, asking to speak with Ryan about a balance due. She said there had been 3 messages like that in 2 days. She asked if I thought they were creditors. I said they sounded like it. She went very still. By afternoon, the first crack widened. Ryan called her from his office and asked where she was. She said she was with me and that she had questions about their accounts. He told her she was being dramatic and that everything would be fine once a deal closed. Then he added that he had been called into a meeting with his manager who wanted to discuss the wedding incident. His voice tried to be easy and missed. She hung up and stared at the table. 2 days later, she called me shaking. Ryan had been let go. The firm cited reputational risk and financial discrepancies that had surfaced when a client complained about mishandled funds. He told her it was a witch hunt. She told me that while he packed his desk, a man came to their building asking for him, leaving a card with a handwritten note about a payment past due. She could not stop her hands from trembling as she spoke. I listened and did not say I told you so. It would have been petty, and she had enough pain without mine piled on top. Instead, I told her to make copies of everything and to move money she earned into a separate account if she had not already. I said she should ask a lawyer about next steps and that if she wanted, I would introduce her to Hannah. She whispered, "Please." The meeting with Hannah happened the next morning at a midtown office with sunlit glass and a reception desk that smelled like citrus. Hannah reviewed statements, asked careful questions, and took notes in a tidy hand. She told Sophia she had options and that she would be fine if she took them. She explained what separation of finances looked like and how to document any transfers. Sophia nodded until her shoulders eased, and for the first time in days, I saw her breathe like a person instead of a voice trapped in a storm. At night, the calls to me did not stop. A cousin said I had taken advantage of a loophole and destroyed a celebration. An old family friend urged me to apologize for the optics. I let the messages pile up without answering. I had an event to run. The Midtown Cultural Arts Benefit was set to kick off in 6 weeks, and the sponsor wanted a presentation to lock the creative direction. I lived in the war room between vendor meetings and spreadsheet revisions. Jenna from design taped swatches to the wall in rows that caught the light differently at each hour. Our audio lead walked the ballroom with me marking power runs with blue painter tape. The floral designer dropped off a mock table, and I asked her to lower the arrangements so people could see each other without leaning. Small changes do the heavy lifting. On the day of the sponsor presentation, I arrived early to run the deck in an empty conference room. I practiced the transitions aloud until the language felt like water. When they arrived, suits and measured smiles, I greeted each by name and handed them a clean agenda. David took a seat at the back and gave me a small nod. My hands were steady. I opened with a single sentence about purpose, then moved into the spine. Entry: Experienced Donor Wall Stage Program, Paddle, Raise, Close. Each section had options that favored elegance over excess. I described lighting cues so they could hear how the room would breathe. I built budgets that gave them choice without false economies. When questions came, I answered with specifics and left room for their taste. The room softened, then leaned forward. When I finished, the sponsor looked at the board chair, and the board chair looked back, and then they both smiled in the way people do when relief finally matches their expectations. They asked for a moment to confer in the hallway. David came up to the front and tapped the corner of the screen and said it was clean and confident. He told me to breathe. I realized I had not taken a full breath since the door opened. When the sponsors returned, the chair said they felt heard and seen and that they wanted to proceed with our plan. He slid a signed commitment letter across the table. I pressed my pen to the paper and added my signature. The room applauded. It was not loud, but it carried. David shook my hand and said, "Well done," with a pride that did not feel performative. The project was ours. The event would be mine to shepherd. That night I took the train to my grandmother's apartment in Brookline. Grandma Eleanor opened the door before I knocked and pulled me into a hug that smelled like lavender. She poured tea in chipped cups she had kept since my grandfather passed and sat with me at the kitchen table. I told her about the presentation about Sophia, about the way the family had responded. She listened without interruption, eyes bright and kind. She said I had done the brave thing, not the easy one. She said courage is quiet until the room goes still, and then everyone hears it. She touched my cheek and told me I had done right by myself, and whether I saw it or not by my sister too. When I left, she pressed a small rosary into my palm and said it was not about religion for her anymore, only about remembering you are held when you think you are alone. A few days later, Olivia showed up at my office at the end of the day, wearing a backpack and a grin that cracked through the gray of the week. She asked if she could see the war room, and I watched her eyes light as she looked at timelines and samples and boards. She said she had watched the internet turn me into a story and that she was proud of the version I was writing on these walls. She asked me how to draw boundaries that hold. I told her you write them down, you tape them to the wall, and you live by them, even when people tell you they are rude. The benefit night arrived crisp and clear. The Metropolitan Ballroom shimmered under a canopy of soft light and low arrangements of white flowers that made the room feel like breath. The run of show held, speakers hit their marks. The performer gave more than we paid for, because the room felt like it belonged to art. During the paddle raise, the numbers on the screen rolled higher than our optimistic target. When the final check was pledged, the sponsor leaned toward me and whispered that he had never felt more taken care of at an event. I stood in the shadows and let the music wash over me. The team exhaled at once. Weeks became months. Sophia met with Hannah and a financial counselor. She moved out for a while and told me she needed space to think without Ryan's voice in her ear. Ryan tried to call me twice. I did not pick up. The viral clips faded like all internet storms do, replaced by the next thing and the next. I kept my head down and did the work. A year later, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of a new office in Midtown Manhattan, the morning light spilling across a desk covered in proofs for the next season. The city moved below like a map that had finally agreed to let me belong on it. I thought of the ballroom where I was told to leave the corridor, where I made the calls, the kitchen tables where girls lose things and learn to keep going anyway. I felt the quiet settle over me, not empty, but strong. Sometimes when they tell you that you do not belong, the best revenge is proving you never needed their seat at the table. If you have ever been told to sit down or stay quiet, share your story, subscribe to hear more, and like this, if it helped you remember your own voice.